introduction. Now, I've got a few technical issues here, so I'm going to turn my voice right down so that, because I'm hearing it back.
Yes, I hear you.
All right, so hopefully you can still hear me. I'm going to talk today about a project that really focuses on the UK context and UK practices, but I think is very much resonant of issues elsewhere across Europe and around the world. And so I hope that you'll find it interesting. I hope you'll find both the sort of issues interesting, I'm sure you will, but also some of the solutions will have resonance with practices where everybody is on the call today. And the research itself had a long gestation. Its origins were about 5 years, a little bit over 5 years ago. Actually, in the last few days before the pandemic hit in Europe, when we published a document called a housing design audit for England. And the audit reviewed 142 large-scale housing-led projects from right across England and reviewed them in terms of their design quality. And we went out and around the country and we measured the design quality in different ways. And the project led to national headlines at the time that as a nation, we were failing on design quality in relation to housing development in particular. In fact, one of the headline findings was that 75% of housing projects in England were either mediocre or poor quality in their design. But not all new housing was revealed to be poor quality by the audit, as many projects around the country were in fact classified as good or very good by the auditors. However, when we correlated those against relative affluence and against sales values, it was apparent that these were often more expensive homes in affluent areas, whilst disadvantaged areas routinely suffered the lowest quality housing environments. And I suspect, although I don't have the evidence, but I suspect this is a common occurrence around the world, that we get those sorts of patterns, so poor quality development in more disadvantaged locations. The consequence of this became obvious when we published a second study in 2020, this time reflecting on the experience of lockdown on the people's health and well-being. So we had the pandemic, we had various lockdowns here and elsewhere, and we did some research to explore the people's experience. And that, of course, was a time when we were all spending enforced a lot longer in our own homes and in our home neighbourhoods. Now, Housing Comforts, the report that we did, concluded that not only were the newest dwellings the most uncomfortable during that time, but disadvantaged communities routinely came off worst, with profound consequences for their health and their well-being. Two factors seem to be key. First, the private market quite simply works less well in such places, in disadvantaged places, with lower land values, leading proportionately to lower investment in all aspects of residential design. So that quality is quite simply squeezed out of the private development product, and also out of associated affordable housing, or house building simply becomes unviable in many of those places. And second, as our more recent studies have shown, this has been perpetuated in large parts of the country, and here I'm talking about England, by the austerity-driven disengagement of the public sector from the governance of design through proactive planning, leading to an over-reliance on regulatory functions of planning and highways, and resulting in the delivery of substandard, market-led products and roads-dominated residential environments, like the type of environment on the screen there. But returning to the housing design audit, critically, when correlating quality with affluence and sales values, we noticed that there were just a few outlying developments that seemed somehow to break the trend. And that raised the question, how exactly were they doing that? How were they delivering good design quality in disadvantaged locations? Well, it's taken 5 years to deliver an answer, and essentially by seeking out those elusive projects where design quality has been successfully delivered in disadvantaged areas and trying to learn the lessons from those experiences. So what exactly did we do? Well, first, we needed to track down stories of success, places that had achieved design quality in disadvantaged locations. And we did that by inviting initially nominations from external parties. Initially, we asked the networks of a series of organisations, the Urban Design Group, Town and Country Planning Association, Civic Voice, which represents civic societies around the country, and our Own Place Alliance network. And we asked those networks to nominate well-designed developments in disadvantaged areas without, in fact, we didn't define exactly what we meant by disadvantage at that time or by design quality. So it was a sort of very open call. Next, we supplemented that with a trawl of recent competition winning schemes to see if there were any likely projects in the lists of schemes that had won competitions. And then from a long list that we had through those two sources, we applied various eligibility rules relating to development size, disadvantage, and quality. So as regards development size, we decided that developments to qualify for our research needed to have at least 30 new homes, either in total or as 30 in maybe a first phase of development. For disadvantage, we adopted a threshold of projects in deciles 1 to 4 of the index of deprivation. So this is an index which is produced by national government of deprivation around the country. Deciles 1 to 4 are the lowest, so they're the most deprived places, or in local authorities in the bottom 25% nationally. For quality, we combined an external audit using the same 17 criteria as used in the national housing audit. So that 5 years before, the national housing audit was the thing that sort of sparked this research. And in that, we used these 17 criteria to measure quality. But we combine that with what's called a healthy homes review, using criteria put together by the Town and Country Planning Association and their methodology. Because what this did is the original housing audit only looked at external factors. So this healthy homes review allowed us to look at some internal factors as well, things like livability of internal space standards, adaptability, fire safety, those sorts of things, to give us a more holistic view of quality. And we took a score of good in the audit as a threshold for inclusion. So schemes weren't included in this latest research unless they at least achieved a rating of good. In other words, not every project we looked at would necessarily win awards for their design quality. They weren't in the very top category, many of them very good, but they represented better or much better than would normally be achieved in these disadvantaged locations. And that's what we were after. We weren't necessarily after award-winning schemes, but we were after schemes that were better than would normally be produced. So we ended up with 20 projects, which cover every region of England. They were developed in a diversity of ways. They encompass different tenures and combinations of tenures. They're located in different types of areas, some more centrally located, others more in suburban areas. As regards density, they range from 30 to 245 dwellings per hectare, but cluster in a sort of mid-density range of about 72 dwellings per hectare. And we captured the stories of those involved through a series of extended, semi-structured group interviews covering the full development process from design through to delivery. And we captured that through a series of semi-structured group interviews covering, as I say, that full process, all to answer the key research question: how do some housing-led developments in economically and socially disadvantaged areas manage to buck the trend of substandard design and deliver high-quality, inclusive and sustainable urban developments? So, to cut to the chase, after much gathering and crunching of interview and other data, it became obvious that the journeys of different projects were clustering around a number of common paths in the form of what we called 10 routes to success. And much of my presentation will focus on these 10 routes to success. So I'll briefly introduce these, beginning with the first 6, which focus on what one might say are broadly concerned with sort of making the development opportunity. So beginning with route 1, which we called creating place creating place and value through design. Now, this describes the classic regeneration path of reinventing post-industrial areas to reset perceptions of them with the hope of defining a completely new market. So here we're talking about large-scale placemaking, but with an inbuilt flexibility for inevitable swings in the prevailing economic environment. So Rochester Riverside there at the top, or Port Loop in Birmingham at the bottom, offer sort of good examples, both of which saw the front loading of key public realm interventions to make a statement about the quality of places being created. And I suppose they involved a certain patience to forego short-term economic returns in favour of enhanced long-term economic and other benefits. And because of this, there is some increased short-term risk associated with these sort of schemes, but that can be offset, and often was, by early public sector loans and grants and a flexible approach to making a return on the sale of public land. A lot of these involved development on public land. The second route is related and involves building a market through architectural innovation, which appeals to key segments of the market, including to environmental pioneers that are looking for something different. This means differentiating projects either functionally, as is occurring in the Leeds Climate Innovation District, and I think the title of that project really says it all, or stylistically and typologically as regards the sort of form of homes being delivered, as was the case in Manchester Roof Gardens, the image there on the bottom right, where back-to-back townhouses with gardens on their roofs help to define a new local market and typology. Now, by definition, this involves a sort of less tried and tested path and therefore carries some technical and market risk. It also requires the involvement of architects with a capability to push design boundaries and developers motivated to support that sort of development. The third route, which we called an entrepreneurial public sector sharing the risk in partnership, involves some form of joint venture partnership that combines the high ambitions and land holdings of the public sector with the development know-how and resources of private developers. Now, in the Rise in Newcastle and Cutler's Wharf in Sheffield, the image is on the screen there, this leadership came from suitably entrepreneurial public sector housing companies interested in delivering new market housing alongside affordable homes and in making a profit to reinvest in more new homes. So making that profit in the public sector, essentially, to reinvest, particularly in affordable housing. In both these projects, the potential of long-term and large-scale rebalancing of the city, of both cities' neighbourhoods that had previously been over-dominated by disadvantaged groups and social housing, first required that they were opened up to new investment. And to do this, both housing companies worked alongside private partners, I think it's fair to say, with a social conscience, who were willing to make their own long-term investments in these council-led projects, and in the bargain got first selection of council land. Route 4 has the rather snappy title, Utilising Underutilised Public Infill Plots in High Value but Deprived Locations. This relates to the particular case of deprivation stemming, amongst other things, from the high cost of housing in many parts of the UK and the urgent need to deliver more affordable homes in such places with their prohibitive land values very often. The answer comes from rationalising small public sector buildings and land holdings, so small plots of land owned by the public sector, including using incidental but poor quality public spaces and parking areas. So the stories here come from Oxford and Greenwich in London, both high value areas. And in these places, council owned housing companies were used to compete. Essentially, they didn't have to compete for land in the open market because they were using small plots of land which the council already owned, and they attempted to redevelop these sites and redevelop them physically, socially, and functionally as well. And where this sort of development is occurring as a concerted strategy, as is happening in Greenwich and in Oxford, significant numbers of new affordable homes and allied community benefits are being delivered in this way, even though the sites are very often very small. The fifth route, that we called cross-subsidising affordability and design quality, is a valid and important route, but perhaps one that we have come to over-rely on in the UK. This has occurred through our dependence on the untapped value of sites, with the sorts of locational advantages that make them attractive enough for private developers that they can develop them and still subsidise affordable homes and high quality design through the hikes in land value associated with these types of development. It requires land values, as was the case in Woodbury Down in Hackney in London, able to support private profits as well as a full range of public benefits, public and of course private, and public interests, of course, being willing to work together to share that value. Importantly, it also requires a public sector, such as in Nottingham, that is determined to push for design quality, that recognises the potential of these sorts of sites to deliver, and which possesses the internal design skills and capacity and regulatory authority to do so. The final route in this section we called simply public sector vision, leadership and funding, and is in a sense the opposite. So rather than looking to the private sector to deliver public benefits, instead a strong local public sector takes on the mantle from inception through to delivery and long-term management in order to build new council homes. Now, these cases use a combination of affordable homes programme grants, so those are national affordable home grants, topped up with receipts that they get from what we call right to buy, which is the ability of people who are living in a council home to buy their own home, and that has been generating receipts over the years that local authorities are able to use. So they essentially they're taking new money from government, and they're taking money that they've already got in the bank, and they're investing in new council homes. This might seem not very clever, but it's strangely enough, it's something which in this country, in England, is we did a lot in the 1960s and 70s, but very little in the decades since then. Now, it helps when borrowing can be guaranteed against existing social housing income, but also against projected future rental income. So these authorities, or authorities with a large social housing stock, already tend to do better here because they have an existing income and they can borrow against that future income as well as against the future income from new housing stock. Ultimately showing the power of the public sector vision and leadership when the will exists to exercise it, as was certainly the case in Gascoigne Estate, in Barking in London, and also in Goldsmith Street in Norwich. Now, many, of course, have argued that this is something that we in the UK should have been doing a lot more of for decades, and other countries have been doing a lot more of this. In other words, public sector building affordable housing than we have in recent decades. Which brings us to the last four routes that cluster in a group focus more on optimizing identified development opportunities. So rather than making the development opportunity, this is about optimizing the development opportunity that's already been recognized. Starting with route 7, that focuses on shifting the economic equation through public intervention designed to stimulate private funding. Now, sometimes this is about bridging a funding gap, and some project teams, such as at Leicester Waterside, have been remarkably adept at bringing a variety of different pots of funding together to do exactly that, often quite small-scale little pots of public funding here and there. It might also involve suspending affordable housing requirements in areas where affordability is not such a problem. So by that, I mean that typically when private developers develop, they are required or asked to produce a certain percentage of affordable housing as part of their private development. But in places where there is a lot of affordable housing already, you may not need to do that. So you might decide to suspend that requirement. It also might require de-risking through forward selling, for example, into the build-to-rent market. So the build-to-rent market has been growing here in the UK in recent years. Also incorporating shared ownership so that affordable housing funds can go a little further, or using what we call overage agreements. Now, these effectively offset income on the sale of public land in favour of a share of future profits. So the public sector is selling land, but they're saying we don't want to take our income from the sale of that land straight away. We will leave that investment in the project and we'll take a future enhanced profit later on. So it's a way of the public sector investing through their land holdings. So this, in essence, is about making the development opportunity more attractive than it otherwise would be. By contrast, the next two routes are about reducing the cost of development. So Route 8, economies of scale across multiple sites, focuses on an approach that in housing has sometimes had a bad press, namely standardization. So in this country, volume house builders' standard ranges have often been derided as anywhereville type homes. And we've yet to see, or we've yet, I suppose, to get over the negative associations left by post-war prefabrication efforts. But standardization also has a positive story to tell in the historic use of pattern book homes and components that still today carry a premium. In different ways, from whole homes manufactured off-site, as at Salford Quays, Salford's Irwell Riverside, to the use of repeated components across sites, as happened at St Mary's in Leicester, standardization was an essential component of many of the stories, done in a manner that allowed sufficient adaptation in order to differentiate and respond to local context. Now, while full-scale modular manufacturing has had a very difficult time in the UK in recent years. In fact, just about every modular manufacturing company has gone bust because of the rather stop-start nature of our housing industry. I think it's fair to say that in the future, the public sector may have to gear up to fill this gap and invest itself in modular manufacturing, particularly because there's a lot of discussion at the moment of a new generation of new towns being built to try and deliver new housing faster. And that's not going to be delivered unless we invest in forms of standardization. With the 9th route, we were getting into the nitty-gritty, as it focuses on preemptively cutting costs through continual design interrogation and therefore avoiding what is often the case, which is a rather crude value engineering late in the development process. In essence, this is about interrogating specifications, procurement practices, and post-permissions delivery to cut out waste and optimize quality within the available budget. It involves a sort of dual focus on quality and cost from the start of the process and across the whole design development process, and taking a long-term approach, preferably over the whole life, to value, alongside bearing down on those short-term costs. Now, both the stories here, Oak Priory in Stoke and the Ridgeway in Hertford, empowered their designers to take such an approach, with both teams very clear from the start about where compromise was possible and where it was not and should be resisted. And so the final route, leveraging community ambition, focuses on the essential role of communities and how to better engage them in defining the critical design parameters of projects, as well as defining a path to success that would deliver for them and for incoming populations. The value of fundamental community engagement is, of course, difficult to overstate when it comes to overarching, or rather overcoming, distrust amongst communities and associated resistance to new development. And consequently, if for no other reason than to remove a potentially costly obstacle to change, establishing mechanisms for a continual feed of community views into the design, development and long-term management processes of projects is critical, as was fully embraced in projects such as Queen's Park in Blackpool. And if this can be done in a manner that makes communities aware of the economic as well as the design parameters of schemes, as happened in the inquiry by design process at Bristol's Filwell Park, then all the better, because this helps communities to understand the necessary trade-offs and play their role in optimizing design outcomes within the given resources. So ultimately, we ended up with 10 routes, And while this all looks very neat, 10 routes, each with 2 stories of success, we also have to bear in mind that these routes relate to each other and overlap. And in theory, any one route can be used in combination with any other. In practice, many of the stories could have been used to illustrate a variety of routes, but some routes in our limited selection of cases were more widely utilised than others, notably Route 1, creating places and value through design, and Route 7, shifting the economic equation. And these were followed by routes 3, 9, and 10, relating to an entrepreneurial public sector working in partnership, continual design interrogation, and leveraging community ambition. Which brings me to my second research question, which the report deals with, concerning what are the key design, planning, engagement, development, and regulatory lessons to be learnt. Now, unfortunately, you'll be glad to hear, I don't have time to do justice to this today. Suffice to say that there is a huge amount to be learned from studying successful practices. And of course, if time allowed, then in relation to the design vision and leadership, I would be keen to tell you that there is tremendous value in the public sector gearing up to deliver housing by creating dedicated housing delivery vehicles and joint venture partnerships. I would suggest, for example, that the government should certainly be ensuring that the new strategic authorities that they're busy setting up around the country should have such a dedicated housing company. I would mention that if I had time, I would mention that as regards proactive planning, site-specific design guidance, notably the use of design codes and project-based design advice, utilising design review, is quite simply fundamental in order to ensure that the public interest is delivered. I would emphasise that community engagement is in some form always has value, even if there is no obvious community to speak to, or distrust is widespread. We just need to tailor how we do it more carefully, as happened at the Mallings in Newcastle, where the architect regularly engaged people in the local pub around a dismantleable cardboard model. I would definitely tell you, if I had time, that on the affordability of design quality, it was telling that so much or so many of the projects took a patient approach to recovering investment as part of larger strategies aimed at turning around places perceived as uninvestable, using design quality as a sort of necessary stimulus. And with regard to the regulatory and delivery journey, I might mention that many of the planning and highway standards that are routinely adopted around the country in England are fundamentally incompatible with delivering new homes in disadvantaged areas, and often need challenging first before we can do anything sustainable or viable. But I don't have time to cover any of that. So instead, I'll conclude by emphasising that there is no single route to achieve high quality, inclusive, sustainable urban development in disadvantaged localities. Instead, there are multiple routes. Likewise, there's no single set of lessons that apply everywhere. So we have choices, and the report that we published dealing with this project can help us to think about what the right routes might be in different circumstances. And this needs to begin, I would suggest, with every local authority adding 2 critical questions to a first on the screen here that they will already be asking themselves. So every English authority is already saying, how are we going to deliver enough new housing? But they should also ask, how are we going to deliver enough high quality new housing? And they should ask, how are we going to deliver enough high quality new housing for everyone, everywhere? Inevitably, some locations are more difficult than others to develop. Equally, if the will exists, then there are always ways and means of tackling inequality head on through an investment in design quality, typically in partnership and almost always requiring strong public sector engagement in the process. Ultimately, if high quality housing development can be delivered in some of the most challenging urban environments in the UK and elsewhere, as the 20 stories show, then it can be delivered almost anywhere. But we need to choose to do so. And the report, which you can download with that QR code on the screen there, the report Tackling Inequality in Housing Design Quality has, we think, many of the answers, at least the answers for England, and I'll be interested to find out whether any of these answers have resonance elsewhere. So the question that we sort of posed to government, local government, developers and others in this country is, well, what are we waiting for? Thank you very much. I will leave it there and try and stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Many thanks, Matthew. Very, very interesting. Also, the topic in general is very interesting because it's not so easy to design quality in every kind of situation for all. So thank you for suggesting this topic that is really quite important.
I hope it made some sense.
Yes, and I have some questions, but I'd like to ask to people who are here if they have some question to ask to Matthew. I don't know if Tim maybe. Okay, Tim. So please.
I'm just seeing if I can get my video going. So fascinating. I know you worked on this stuff for a long time. Oh, I've got the echo. Never mind.
Yeah, this is what I'm getting. I'm getting this echo all the time. I can't hear. I can hardly hear.
Anyway, never mind. I'll try and keep my questions short. So I'd like to just basically for the concepts of affordability and inclusion a bit more, particularly in terms of Route 7, which you called shifting the economic equation. And I was just wondering, how did you ensure that these developments really were affordable and inclusive within the areas that they were built? You probably already realised that I'm kind of getting at the mailings in Newcastle, which is a very lovely development. However, I would really question, and it is in a very, very poor area, and it is bringing a lot of, it has sort of generated a lot of interest and a sort of a domino of more development in that area. But I would really question its affordability and its inclusion. And I suppose what I'm just trying to get at is, how do we make sure that these processes don't actually just create little islands of gentrification of quality within areas which otherwise are actually quite, still quite problematic, and where people don't really feel that this is for them. I hope that, sorry, I've rambled on a bit, but as I say, I'd keep it short, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, excellent question. Actually, it stopped echoing now, so that's great. Something's happened. It's working now. Brilliant. No, excellent question. Yeah, and so the answer to that is we were looking at how to deliver design quality in disadvantaged areas. We weren't necessarily looking at how to deliver affordable housing in areas of disadvantage. And whilst a lot of the schemes were delivering affordable housing, or part affordable and part market, some weren't. And the argument of very often of local authorities is, well, we need first to sort of turn perceptions around at the place. We need to build a market. We need to build a place that people are willing to invest in. We need to get land values that are not negative land values. And so something like, the scheme that you mentioned in Newcastle, yes, I mean, that ultimately was all market housing, wasn't it? But it was in a very challenging location. But what it's led to is a set of other projects which are continuing that regeneration. And I haven't looked at those, so I don't know to what extent the division is between more affordable and market housing in the other projects that it's given rise to later on. But it's helped to spark that wider regeneration. So I suppose, yes, it's not absolutely not every scheme that we looked at is affordable by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. That's really clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Matthew. There is someone else who wants to ask something. I don't know, Carlo, Giuseppe. If not, I can ask to Matthew. So it's everything was very interesting. I remember the image in which it's possible to see the green close to the house, because this is very important to eliminate cars and try to put more green. Okay, so this is one of the objective of the affordability and the quality in your thought and in the project research you mentioned. So to eliminate space for cars and give more space to green for people, and also some, I don't know, playground or something else. So not only the house in itself, but also something of service for people.
Yeah, a critical part of the actually, Maricela, I think it's your if you mute yourself, then that stops the there we are, perfect. Let's stop the echo. Yeah, so a critical part of design quality in terms of the way we measured it was the green environment and the natural environment, and incorporating biodiversity and so forth, and play facilities and all of those critical public realm factors, which you absolutely have to have to create a well-functioning neighborhood. But interestingly, what we found is that quite a few local authorities up and down the country here are imposing standards, which you might call sort of suburban standards, in areas where they are totally unnecessary. For example, most disadvantaged areas tend to have a lower car ownership than non-disadvantaged areas, so they don't necessarily need so much parking. They're often also in areas with better public transport linkages already, because they tend to be in urban areas and so forth. And so you don't need to impose the same sort of parking standards on those places as maybe a sort of a more suburban area around the periphery of development or of a city. So yeah, there's sort of difficult things here. It's about not just about delivering public space or the right levels of parking, but it's about getting it right for the circumstances. And sometimes those disadvantaged locations have different needs to other places within the same municipality.
Okay, and I know that this is not the main topic, but during participation, because if I understand well, participation was a very important part of this. Someone asked for more bike lanes to get to the house, etc., or not. So imagine that you administer some questionnaire. So people ask for different kind of mobility, so bike lanes or more pedestrian paths, etc.
We didn't. We weren't ourselves. I wonder whether you could turn your mic off, because yeah, that's perfect. I keep on hearing it back to me. Yeah, so we were interviewing the developers, the designers, people from local authority, highways authorities and so forth. We weren't ourselves interviewing the community, so we weren't involved in community engagement, but many of the projects that we were looking at had themselves had often quite fundamental, long-running community engagement processes. And many of those had good bike-related infrastructure as part and parcel of the developments. Now, whether that had come through as part of the sort of the community engagement or not, I'm not sure. I'd need to look into more detail, on that. But certainly, a lot of them had very good cycle infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, but my interest in public space as you. So,
Yeah.
and another question about. Do you think in all the case studies you mentioned, do you think that one could be a sort of best practice? So you think that some specific characteristics, how to say, can create best practice differently from other? So a kind of ingredients of the recipe that you have design quality in housing.
Well, I think they're all best practice in different ways. I mean, some of them are amazing schemes that have won awards. Others are more sort of run-of-the-mill routine sort of schemes, but they're all chosen as schemes which you wouldn't normally expect in those locations because of the particular disadvantaged nature of those locations, the challenging nature of those locations. And yet a way has been found of overcoming that and delivering design quality, sometimes excellent design qualities, sometimes just design that is significantly better than you would normally expect. Exactly which are the best, you'd have to look and decide yourself.
Okay. And so someone else, don't know, Vasiliki Petrido.
Yes. Hello.
Thank you, Vasiliki.
Hello. I don't know if you're listening.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew, for this excellent presentation. And I would like to ask about these best practices and public green areas. Who will take care of these public spaces? Who will pay for this, for the maintenance? Because I visited recently Coventry Center, and I think that the public spaces that it was designed in the 60s, it is very good, has a very nice quality, but the public take care of these spaces are in a way that somebody can say that the space is awful. So the question for me is who will take care and who will look after of all these best practices and the green town of the town?
Yeah, good question. Ultimately, I suppose the different case studies had different sort of combinations. Some were delivered entirely privately, others were delivered many by partnership, public-private partnerships, some purely by the public sector. So those delivered by the public sector, what we might call council housing, will be retained in public ownership, and the public sector ultimately will be responsible for any green spaces, any public areas that are part and parcel of those schemes. Those in the private sector, increasingly, we have a model whereby the community themselves are having to pay into a management pot for the management of those public spaces, because since we've had sort of austerity policies now for the last 20 years or so, local governments are increasingly unable, they would say, unwilling, others would say, to take on responsibility for the management of new green spaces, new green public spaces, which I think is a shame. We've even had the problem in many of our, new streets are created, and we've not been able to have any trees in the streets because the public sector isn't willing to maintain trees, and it's a big problem here. But typically it will be some sort of management organization that the residents pay into.
Okay, thank you, Vasiliki and Matthew.
Thank you.
And so I don't know if someone else want to ask something. If not, I would like to resume some important things about GUD. So, okay. Matthew, thank you again for this topic. I hope that also the other who are here and the other GUD could read your paper, because it is very interesting. And also, as you promised, you will organize a book presentation when it will be ready.
The book is a long way off, so it's going to be at least a year away.
Okay, but you promised, so later I will ask you again. And so before concluding this seminar and research presentation, I would like to remind you that July 3rd, we will have our conference on community public spaces for university in Rome. And after this conference, we will have our General Assembly. So you will receive a link to participate in this. We have here Vasiliki Petridou, who will be one of the keynote, and we will have also Eric Mumford and Graham Shane, who will be our 3 keynote speakers. So remember that next July at 5, we will have our General Assembly, and I hope that is an open assembly, so not only who is member of GUD, but everybody are invited to participate in it. I will show you our next interesting activity that we want to organize, not only seminar, etc., but also something else to improve our network. So, and then we will have other important activity that you will receive through email. So, Matthew, thank you again, and thank you to everybody, and see you next. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.